It's good to see everyone this morning. We're going to begin in just a moment. Before we do, let's bow and have a word of prayer. Once everybody's ready. You're good. All right, let's bow. Our God in heaven, thank you for this time together. Thank you for all the love that you show to us, Father. You've made such a wonderful world that we can live in. And while it's decaying and dying, Father, we still appreciate and we can see all the beauty in your creation. We thank you for the love that you show us every day. We recognize, Father, that that degradation is because of sin. Help us to see that in our lives. Help us to do better. Help us to be who you want us to be. Thank you for Jesus who shows us the way. Thank you for this congregation. Help us to strive to hold your banner high. Help us to be useful to you in this community and in your kingdom. Thank you for all the good things you do, Lord, but most of all, thank you for Jesus. Bless us in this hour. Help us to be mindful of your word as we continue looking at the story that you have laid before us to show us how much we need your son Jesus and all the good things that you laid down so that we could see that this was a clear plan, that you wanted us to be saved, that you wanted us to be yours completely and wholly. Bless us in this hour. Help us to do your will. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. So we're in page 82. We're going to do a brief review of the book of Judges. And I want to start with my apologies. I prepared this morning thinking that we would do lesson 20 and 21. I had not looked back at the Wednesday before, so that's my fault. But we will be able to go through lesson 21, hopefully go into lesson 22. But if I'm lacking a little bit in preparation, hope that's okay. But thankful for everyone being here today. As we review the book of Judges, what are some things that we remember and keep in mind as we think about that book?
Well, to begin with, all those who came into the land of Canaan, those who came in with Joshua were faithful, it seems, all the years they were alive, but as that generation passed on, they started to be influenced by the people they hadn't run out yet. So
that's generally true. In the specifics, what do we see though? Joshua and the elders that were ruling with him, they were faithful to God. What was lacking in the people? What was lacking in the tribes when they came into the land?
They did not trust him fully in God.
Okay, and what did that practically mean?
They served other things like idols and wanted other things like the other nations, such as kings.
Well, we're skipping ahead there. I think that's true. That certainly happens. What was their failure when they came into the land?
They just did not destroy all the Canaanites.
There you go. Yeah. They didn't really drive out the fullness of what they were supposed to do there. And that leads to these problems, which it ties in with it. And so that's why I say, generally that's absolutely true. They fell astray very quickly, and it's within one generation that happens. We go back and we think about what God laid down, and we think about the Old Testament and the structure of it, and we have the books of law, the 5 books of the Pentateuch. That's what Moses wrote, and it's assumed that at some point Joshua or someone else took up this writing, because I don't believe that Moses necessarily wrote about his own death, per se. Perhaps he could have through the Spirit. But then we move into the books of history, which entail, the start of it at least, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, and then in 1 Samuel. That's kind of the range we're looking at right now. Some of this is concurrent. Some of this actually happens sort of at the same time. It would seem that the story of Ruth happened somewhere toward the latter end of the book of Judges. We don't know exactly when or which judge was ruling at that time. But by the time we get to 1 Samuel, who do we see being judged at the beginning of 1 Samuel?
Eli.
Eli. Very good. And so the time frame of Judges, we're looking at about 300 years. This is from about 1350 to 1050 BC. Here is our map of Canaan in the days of the Judges. And do you notice something about this map? What do you see kind of spread all over it? Maybe you don't see it very well. Oh, well, that's not what I want. No, come on. What is it doing? Okay. I was trying to zoom in on the map. Do you see the arrows that are all over the map?
Yeah.
That might be a little bit harder to see, but you see them coming from all sorts of different areas, and this is meant to represent all the enemies that are coming in and subduing Israel, causing trouble for Israel, and fighting against Israel. And so let's go through, we're going to go through our various, I know page 82 is just basically a chart that lists all the judges. And I want us to note too, I don't think this is literally all the judges. Certainly there were others that we just aren't told about. Because you have big timeline jumps that, again, we just don't have all the answers to. And then even here, we have the sense of that not all of these have everything told about them. If you filled in this chart, how much of the chart is blank? Or he did say, if not given, right, not given in the appropriate blank. I just kind of did a little scratch mark on my chart. How much of the chart is blank?
A good hand.
Good bit, yeah. And so this tells us that we're not given everything we might want to know about these things. And this is just universal to the whole of Scripture. God doesn't just give us what we might want to know. He gives us what we need to know. And we base our faith on that. So, first when we talk about Othniel in the region up here, we'll talk about some of the differences there. Ehud is in this region. Deborah. It's good for us to kind of get a grip on kind of where all these people were, and we can refer back to this map as we go through as well. And of course, the verse toward the end of Judges sums up the whole book, right? There was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes, which, again, is a blessing and a curse. Because I think it's automatic for us to think, well, this is automatically a bad thing. But as we talked about last couple of Sundays ago, there are periods of the Judges where there's peace. Relative peace. I mean, look at the column where it says years of peace, 40 years, 80 years, and then another 40 years, another 40 years. So there's a big span of time where there's really peace for the children of Israel. And that is always associated with what? What is peace associated with in the book of Judges?
No war.
No war? Okay. Huh? Obedience to God. Faithfulness. That's exactly. So peace is tied in with faithfulness, trusting God. Go ahead. Yeah, imagine that. Yeah. So that what a great lesson for us to keep in mind there. That there, and the negative part of this is, of course, that there was no king to really get them in the right mindset. David, I think, is somebody who was at least trying to get the people in the right mindset. Same as Solomon and other kings that were ostensibly faithful, at least for the most part faithful. Let's talk about Othniel. What was the enemy in Othniel's day? Mesopotamia. Specifically Cushan Rishathaim. And how many years were the children of Israel oppressed under him? 8 years. What tribes were affected by that? Somebody.
The northern tribe.
Manasseh? Yeah, so we talked about the northeastern area up there, which makes sense. Mesopotamia, remember the Fertile Crescent? Where I'm doing this kind of mirrored here. Mesopotamia is over here. We've got the Fertile Crescent. We've got Israel kind of down here. And so Mesopotamia, they're not going to come marching through the Arabian desert. They're going to be marching through the fertile ground. And so that's where they come from the north. How many years did Othniel judge Israel?
40 years.
40. How many years of peace were there because of his acts? It was 40. So he brought them back to the Lord. Anybody have an interesting fact about Othniel that they put down?
Son of Kenaz, the Caleb's younger
Caleb, yeah.
brother.
Son-in-law to Caleb. And of course, in this time too, we recognize that Israel forgot God and served the Balaam. Y'all talked about that a couple Wednesdays ago. All right, Ehud. What was the enemy in Ehud's day?
Well, it looks like Moabites,
Moab.
Ammonites, Amalekites. A whole
Yeah.
lot.
So a trifecta. How many years did they oppress Israel?
18.
18 years. What tribes were affected?
Benjamin, Ephraim, Gad, Reuben.
Mm-hmm. Very good. And where was in the battle? What area was that battle in that Ehud fought? Region of Jericho, which is interesting because what was one of the first big victories they had?
Jericho
It was
was
Jericho.
destroyed.
Yeah, absolutely. And the land had rest for how long?
80 years.
80 years. And of course, the story of Ehud is really interesting. You got a lot of interesting facts you can pick from here. What's one that somebody got that they would like to share?
He's left-handed.
Left-handed man? Mm-hmm. What did he do with that left hand?
He made a special sword.
Killed Eglon.
Go ahead, Murphy.
He killed Eglon.
Yeah. Killed Eglon with that sword. And then we have the fact that 10,000 men died in battle at that time. How about Shamgar? What do you know about Shamgar?
He fought the Philistines. Oh, he
Fought the
used
Philistines.
a sharp pointed stick
Mm-hmm.
to kill 600 of them fellows.
Okay.
Ox goad. The sharp pointed stick.
All right. Mr. Alvey, what do we know about Deborah's judgeship? What was the enemy in her day?
Canaanites.
Mm-hmm. Specifically, we have Jabin and Sisera mentioned, but they, obviously they are Canaanites. But how many years were the Israelites oppressed here, Murphy?
20.
20 years. What tribes were affected? Ken, do you have that? Mr. Bill?
I got Naphtali and Zebulon.
Yeah, absolutely. The battle area, Miss Debbie? Okay. Mount Tabor. How many years did Deborah judge Israel? Miss Linda? 20? Oh, 40? Yeah, my brain, sorry. How many years of peace did they have? 40? I heard 40. Okay. And what are some interesting facts about her judgeship? Anybody have anything?
Barak was Timothy.
Yeah, Barak didn't want to go to fight against Sisera by himself. He wanted Deborah to come with him. And so she said, well, because of this, credit's going to be given to a woman for Sisera's fall. And that's exactly what happened. Anybody happen to remember how that went down? What did Jael do? Nailed him to the floor. Yeah. I remember the first time I read that in Judges, my eyes kind of bugged out as a kid. I was like, whoa. Yes, sir.
We were at Florida College in Bible class, Brother English River, who had a great sense of humor. We were having a review quiz, and he was going to talk about Sisera. He smiled and quipped, now they really had this fellow pegged.
Oh, boy. Yeah.
What a pun.
Oh, boy. All right. One of the most heroic tales, I think, of the book is the story of Gideon. Gideon is a really interesting figure. What was the enemy in his days? Brother Alley? The Midianites, the Amalekites. How many years were they oppressed? Brother John?
I don't have that. I
Okay.
have 0.
Okay.
So
7 years. 7 years. What battle area did Gideon fight in?
Valley of Jezreel.
Valley of Jezreel. And that's where, remember on that map, we had Gideon sort of in the central area. That's where that valley is, going up through there. How many years did Gideon judge Israel? I heard 40. That's right. How many years of peace? 40. Most of these you can kind of guess 40 and you'll be right. What's one of the interesting facts that we can remember about Gideon?
Started out with
Dan conquered Midian.
Yeah. Conquered Midian with 300 men
Right.
and overtook them. And there's a number of other things you could think about with the fleece and the dew on the fleece and so on and so forth.
Right.
But primarily for our sake, we're going to think about this in national geographical ways. Okay, so Abimelech is not technically a judge, is he?
No.
But he's just the next guy that comes along. What battle area was his? Shechem, yeah. And what did he do that was, I guess, interesting is a way you could put it. I would say vicious.
Kill all his brothers, save one.
Yep. Who was his dad, by the way? Gideon. So think about Gideon. Think about, I don't know, I think about that now, all the good things that Gideon had in his faith, but it really came to nothing because of what he allowed to go on after the fact. It's an interesting thing to think about there. So, but then we go back to this sense of God actually calling upon people, and we go through some people that are mentioned very briefly. How about Tola? The only thing we really know about him is how long he judged. 23 years. And all we know is that he arose to save Israel. And we don't even know who he rose to save Israel from. So again, it's this sort of thing where we recognize, the text is telling us this, and we just appreciate the fact that we're told about it. Jair, kind of similar. How many years did Jair judge? 22. And we're told not much about him except the fact that he had 30 sons that rode 30 donkeys. And he had 30 cities. Sounds like a guy that's got a lot going on. I don't really know what else to say about that except that obviously he was raised up to judge Israel. Then Jephthah. What do we know about Jephthah? What was the enemy in his day? Ammon. How many years did the Ammonites oppress Israel? 18 years. What tribes were affected?
Reuben, Gad,
And Manasseh, yeah. These were all on the eastern side of the Jordan. And so that they would have been hit in that way. Skip that. Years judged, 6 years judged. And then what's one of the main interesting thing we remember about Jephthah? The rash vow he made. What did you say, Miss Linda? Okay, yeah. He promised God that he would sacrifice the first thing that comes from his house if God delivered them from Ammon. And he's victorious, and his daughter comes out of his house to meet him, and he sacrifices his daughter. There's some question about whether he really sacrificed her or not. That's really a conversation for another day. But I think the point is that he made a promise that was just, intense. I've heard arguments from both sides on that. Why would the text treat it like this big deal if all she's doing is being a virgin for the rest of her life? I think it's a fair question.
One of the virgins yearly keep that day as sacred.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's a very good point, very good question there. So, all right, let me go here. Okay, Ibzan. How many years did Ibzan judge? 7. And we're told that he had how many sons? 30 sons given in marriage outside of the family. So,
That's real.
again, it's a lot of sons, I suppose, when you think about it. Elon. What do we know about him?
How many years he judged? 10?
That's it. Judge Israel for 10 years. And certainly not the same Elon we think about in modern times. Abdon. How many years did he judge Israel? 8. And we're told he had 40 sons and 30 grandsons. And they rode on 70 donkeys. Big deal to have donkeys back then. So then we come to Samson. Samson is a really fascinating tale. And I think I think Samson's kind of a funny tale in a way. Like it's funny but tragic in a sense. I think of Samson as he's like a Popeye, or he just goes around beating up people, whoever he feels like beating up. Yes, sir.
There's a phrase in the Bible that has always stuck in my head. He smote them hip and thigh. I looked it up, and it's talking about Samson. And I reckon that's the only page in the Bible, but I thought that was kind of an interesting phrase.
Oh yeah. Cut them down. Miss Janice and Miss Murphy.
Why would they tell us about the donkeys? Does it indicate wealth or something?
Yeah, I think that might indicate some aspect of wealth and just their success. That may have some aspect of it, Ken.
Might be like the family car,
Like the family
30
car.
kids, you got to have 30 donkeys.
That might be it. That might be part of it. Yeah. I don't know. I don't have a full answer for you though, except that that's what it might indicate, some aspect of wealth. Does anybody else have an idea?
Just a thing. They talk about David riding a mule,
Mm-hmm.
and I guess evidently it was a special thing to have a mule.
Mm.
We always think maybe later on in our country's history we start hearing about mules. But
Mm-hmm.
evidently, mule was a very prestigious thing to have.
Mm. Mr. Murphy.
Sacred oath.
Okay, George said the expression "smote them hip and thigh" is interesting, but there's another part of that: "smote them hip and thigh with a great slaughter."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, he decided. We would say he decisively defeated them, or in the words of our day, he annihilated them.
Yeah. Who is the enemy that he's fighting, by the way?
The Philistines.
The Philistines. I don't think it's a stretch to say that Samson could have obliterated the Philistines.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
If he'd really been on point and really wanted what God wanted and didn't let his desires get in the way, think of how effective he would have been. The Philistines are not really fully wiped out, if I remember correctly, until the reign of David and Solomon. I think maybe they last till Solomon's day, which is funny because y'all talked about the Philistines a couple of Wednesdays ago, and I'm sure y'all talked about how they came from Crete and settled, and they had more of a centralized control at that time, but that broke up fairly early, and so you don't have this huge thing there. It's a matter of when you think about how sometimes opposition to the gospel seems huge and just unmovable, and you just can't shake it, and there's nothing you can do against it. But the reality is that there's really nothing there. That what's there is just an opposition to God. And once you realize that, it loses any power to really influence you in that sense. I'm not saying that you never are influenced in bad ways, but I'm just saying that once you get that and you're on God's side, it takes a lot more to shake you. And I think that's the sense that we get with the Philistines. We'll talk more about that in the lesson with Saul. But how many years had the Philistines oppressed Israel? 40 years. So now, look at the years beforehand. Look at the column that says years of oppression. The longest time we have up there is 20 years for Deborah, right? And now we're doubling that as far as the years of oppression. And we're going to see a similar thing with Eli. The years of oppression are more, and we don't have any instance here or any kind of mention here about years of peace for the children of Israel, which is really fascinating, which tells us that the worse Israel gets, the less peace they have. And that, again, I think that lesson teaches itself in the sense that the more we're on God's side, the more peace we'll have. The more distant we come from God, the more far away we get from God, the less peace we'll have. What tribes were affected by the Philistines? Dan. And I believe we talked about in the previous lesson about how Dan was affected so much they had to move up to the north. Their southern territory was essentially dominated by the Philistines. They ended up renaming Laish in the north to Dan. And so we keep that in mind. How many years did Samson judge Israel? 20 years. And we've already kind of talked about some of his interesting facts here. But I think killing 1,000 Philistines with the jawbone of a donkey certainly falls into an interesting fact. It's really, you scratch your head thinking about what did that look like physically? But anyway, we talk about the hair, him getting cut loses his strength. And of course, at the end, he prays for strength. He kills more Philistines in his death than when he was alive, after he had been imprisoned. All right. Any other questions or comments about Samson? Yes, sir.
One interesting fact I put down was he tore a lion apart with his bare hands.
There you go. Yeah, absolutely.
Must have been one more gathering for over 1,000 people to be assembled.
Yeah, absolutely. A big feast, and they're kind of treating Samson as if he's the clown, basically. And he called, and I think again that's a point where he's praying to God at his death, and I think that's why we see him essentially mentioned in Hebrews 11. So
one other thing I was thinking, Stephen, is that we have basically 4 chapters about Samson, but in reading it, it almost seems like it happened bam, 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 but that's over a 20-year period. And so it's hard for us to kind of absorb that sometimes. This just didn't happen overnight. Of course, there's a space of time where he's there in prison and being tortured and grinding and all that stuff. But it's a pretty interesting story.
Oh yeah, it really is. So we come to Eli, and again, early on, it was hard. It was interesting to realize when I got to the point where I realized, there's still judges in 1 Samuel, and it's not just like when the book of Judges ends, that's the end of the judges. Eli, what was the enemy in Eli's day? The Philistines. We still see the Philistines being a problem. Think about the peace that God's people could have had if Samson had fought them more effectively. How many years did Eli judge Israel? 40. And we see that announced at his death. What's interesting here is he is the first judge that we know of that had a descent from Aaron. So he's a priest. And of course, I know there are other interesting facts we could think of. Anything else about Eli?
During his time, the Ark of God had been taken.
Ark of God was captured.
That's what occasioned his death when he was sitting at the gate. And the messenger told him all the other things, Hophni and Phinehas are dead. They've been defeated, and then the Ark of God's taken. But when he heard about that, he fell backward and broke his neck.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, sir.
Well, I don't know if I heard everything he said, but he had all of his sons were dishonest. I guess that's the best way of putting it.
Well, yeah,
Caused a lot of resentment in the people.
Absolutely. All right. Anybody else?
Fears that there was no peace during his days. The Philistines were constant in battle with him, as well as Israel.
Absolutely. What was the one ray of hope in Eli's day? Samuel. Samuel. And I'm going to be mentioning Samuel in the lesson today, so I won't go too far into that part of thinking about him as a ray of hope there. But again, what was the enemy in Samuel's day? Philistines. So again, we see that being a common issue. How many years did he judge Israel? 20. And that would have taken place basically from the death of Eli on. Somewhere in that place, God literally called upon him to judge Israel. We already know he had a conversation with God, that he had a connection with God that really nobody had in Israel for a long time. And so, but the years of peace.
He made peace each year.
Yeah. Yeah, basically his whole life. And that's an interesting thing too, because when we think about that, Samuel did so much to help the nation of Israel in such a selfless way that's really an amazing lesson for us to consider. What happened to bring him into the service of Eli in the first place? Yeah. His mother Hannah dedicated him to the Lord. And she wanted a child so badly, she said, whatever you do, I'm going to give him to you. And that's exactly what happened. A beautiful part of that story is that Hannah afterward has many more sons. And it's a great blessing for her. Samuel did make his sons judges over Israel. What did they do? Whatever they wanted, yeah. It turned to filthy lucre. So Eli's sons had essentially been greedy. They wanted to take more meat from the offering than don't burn it first. We take it first. You take the raw meat, and so there's a greediness there that made the sacrifices more of a burden to the people of Israel. Whereas Samuel's sons, it just seems like they're just trying to get rich quick as much as they can. But Samuel does anoint Saul as king, and he later anoints David to be king instead of Saul. All right, so he's got another thing here where we're putting the events in a chronological order. This was not in I saw it on the PowerPoint here, but this is not on my printout. Is it on yours, this chronological order thing? Okay, this must have been something he added to. But we've done this a little bit already. But I think it would be useful for us to just keep going, given our time this morning, as long as that's okay with everybody. I'd like for us to move forward into lesson 22. Let me move over to that briefly. All right. So lesson 22 details Saul, the first king of Israel. We've already been over the fact that Samuel was the 15th judge, and we talked about how he grew up around the tabernacle at Shiloh, worked with Eli the priest, and he became the leader of Israel after the Ark of the Covenant was stolen. Samuel told the people this in 1 Samuel 7 and verse 3. If you return to the Lord with all your hearts, then put away the foreign gods and the Ashtoreths from among you, and prepare your hearts for the Lord and serve him only, and he will deliver you from the hand of the Philistines. And the people actually did listen to Samuel, to their credit. They put away their idols. And they gathered at Mizpah to fast and to pray for forgiveness. This is a very good thing. When we see Israel doing what's right, that's our ray of hope in the Old Testament. The book of Judges is such an oppressive read because we just see things getting worse and worse and people being worse and worse. And so when we see the people doing something good, we need to be grateful for that as we go through our reading. The Philistines heard that they had assembled, and they bring an army to attack Israel. But Israel drives them back to Beth-kar. And the next several years are peaceful. Samuel makes a yearly circuit from Bethel to Gilgal to Mizpah and back to Ramah. And this is kind of similar, I think, to the thought of an evangelist making a circuit and preaching in various places. And that's what he would have been doing, is trying to urge people to faithfully follow God, to do what he commands. And as we talked about, Samuel made his sons judges, and this was done in Beersheba. You can see down there, it's to the south. But these men were not righteous men, and there was no central government to enforce the law. Now, I want to say this too, again, that it wasn't a requirement for there to be a central government to enforce the law. But I think the people were thinking, well, this is what we need. We've got to get some fix for this. And it's in this time that the land begins to shrink. All these enemies that they've left around, you notice how they're sort of encroaching in. And you notice how some of these places, the Philistines are, well, I know what's happening. Something's messing up here. I apologize. I can't zoom in, but we will try to do this right here. Okay. Let's see if we can do this. There we go. Can we see that? Okay, zoom in just a little bit. But you notice those places of Gath and Eglon, that used to be the Philistine border. And look how far they've come over. Yeah. So you can kind of see that encroachment coming in there. And so this is really something where we appreciate the fact that God is helping them understand, like, this is not what we need to be doing. But the Israelites could only blame themselves for losing the land, and they didn't keep the commandments of the Lord. The command was, you shall utterly destroy them, Deuteronomy 7, verse 2. But that's not what they did. Waldron talks about in his book about the Phoenicians who settled along the coast. The Canaanites settled in the central area. And the Canaanites eventually became absorbed into the Israelite population because they tolerated them so much. And then we've talked about the Philistines in the south. The Syrians also are discussed. They settled from Aram in the northwestern portion of Mesopotamia to the west. In time, they grew to become a mighty power in the land. We're going to see Syria being a major issue in some areas in the time of the divided kingdom. Yes, sir.
Still are.
Oh, yeah. Well, okay.
It just never has ceased. There's been problems over there from I guess way back.
Yeah. What I would add to that is that some of the more modern problems is because of the British government bringing Europeans in, and that's a whole other conversation. But which doesn't have anything to do with the Bible. But so the Israelites cry out for a king, though. They, in their minds, the system had let them down. And they essentially are blaming God for this. They want a king to be like the other nations. And I think that's spot on, too, from the standpoint that what does God tell Samuel when Samuel's disappointed about what he hears from them?
They haven't rejected you, they rejected me, that I should not.
Yeah. But they said basically, hey, you're old and your sons don't follow in your ways, right? So verbally, that's what they're saying, but God is pointing to the central problem. The problem is not necessarily Samuel. And I think there's something there too. We talk about how Eli was a failure. He failed to restrain his sons.
Yeah.
Right? But that same thing is not said about Samuel. Yet Samuel's sons are just as wicked. And I think the distinction is that Samuel, I don't know about this for sure. The text doesn't literally say it, but there's a strong implication. The fact that God is not rebuking Samuel for his sons, you would think if Samuel had not done what was right, that God could have said, hey, this is why this is happening, because you didn't restrain your sons. You didn't teach them right. But it looks like he did. And so perhaps Samuel is an example that we can point to say, well, Samuel did the best he could, but they still made their decisions, right? And so that is one point that we could look at there. But that said, regardless, perhaps there were bigger things at work there. Perhaps Samuel was overall just a better man than Eli as well in terms of his faithfulness. But they wanted a king to be like the other nations, to lead them in battle like the other nations. This superficial obedience to God was a failure for them. And so we want to look briefly as we think about these enemies that are attacking Israel or encroaching upon Israel, perhaps. The Phoenicians are up in the northern area. When the Bible mentions Tyre and Sidon, those are very ancient cities. And even when we get to the Gospels, Tyre and Sidon are going to be mentioned. And you remember the Phoenician woman, the Syrophoenician woman that needed healing from Jesus, needed help from Jesus. Go ahead, Ken.
I was just finally put together because I'm trying to figure out where the Phoenicians fit in all this.
Yeah, so Syrophoenician means Syria and Phoenicia. It's this blend of peoples up in the north. So that's what that eventually became. But the Phoenicians, it's thought the Phoenicians also were essentially transplants, perhaps even Greeks that had been expatriated or transported to these lands. And then we have the Canaanites, who are more in the central portion of Israel. Still kind of coastal places, but not as well known as far as port cities. But as I say, they eventually blended into the rest of the Jews and Israel, the Hebrews. Philistines to the south. Again, you see Philistia encroaching upon Israel very close. The Amalekites to the south, farther down that way. Moab. You remember where Moab is. And then Ammon. One thing that Waldron makes a good point of, and it's a good thing for us to remember, when he talks about Gilead, and when the Bible talks about Gilead, Gilead was the nice country sort of toward the center here. If I can point right there, if you see my mouse pointer. Gilead was thought of as right there. In some cases, especially when we look at the book of Judges, when it mentions Gilead, in that sense, it includes this area basically from the Dead Sea all the way up to the Yarmuk. So that area. But Ammon would have lived in a more desert type area. And the places of Gilead with lots of fertile land for livestock and stuff to eat on, that would have looked like really, really good land. So you can kind of see why Ammon pushed so hard to get more and more of that land, because they just don't really have a whole lot back here. All right. So then we think about the Syrian states, again, which are going to be in the northeast, that will be encroaching on them. And I mentioned already Tyre and Sidon up in the north there, regions of cities of Philistia. And we remember Jerusalem. Remember, Jerusalem is not conquered yet. The day is going to come when David is going to conquer the Jebusites that are in Jerusalem, but that's not yet. And so Jerusalem is still a place that that's going to be an issue for them. Well, people gathered to Ramah to ask Samuel to appoint them a king. He's distressed, but God tells him to grant their request. As we discussed, Samuel anoints King Saul of the tribe of Benjamin. And I think the most heroic thing that Saul ever did was to save the city of Jabesh Gilead from the Ammonites. It's really interesting. A king who is ostensibly, in his mind, he's always fighting the Philistines. That's just throughout his campaign. That just seems to be the main goal for him, is to fight the Philistines. But the greatest thing he did, I think, was to save the city of Jabesh Gilead. Because if you go all the way to Saul's death at the hand of the Philistines, who were the ones that took Saul's body and properly, took care and buried him and his sons? It's the men of Jabesh Gilead. They remembered what Saul did for them. And so there's a little thing in there that's like, even this guy who had just lost his mind entirely, he went insane through his sin. We can still appreciate the fact that he did that. The Ammonites were defeated. This is the first time that Israel maintains a standing army. Beforehand, it had just been more of a smaller kind of tribal aspect of things. It's kind of how we think of in our country's history. 150, 200 years ago, every citizen was supposed to be a member of the local militia. And that's what would come to be if you needed to band together and fight back anybody. But eventually, we had a standing navy, we had a standing army eventually, and so on and so forth, which is a different thing. So I think that's kind of a good comparison. Well, the people rejoice. They weren't sure about Saul's capabilities, but they rejoiced in their victory and their new king. There were some people who were rebels at the time who pushed back against the idea of Saul. But generally, the people are confident that Saul could lead them. And early on, Saul has this great humility, this great sense of knowing that he's not he's not the one, he's not the perfect one. But we see them with a standing army, and I believe that is maintained. He keeps 3,000, sends the rest back home. 2,000 accompany him to Michmash in Mount Bethel, and 1,000 accompany his son Jonathan and go to Gibeah. Jonathan is a fantastic guy too. He is in many ways, he is a hero. Jonathan attacks the Philistines at Geba in retaliation. They're angered and they bring their army en masse to Michmash. And Saul calls all soldiers of Israel to battle, but this army was much more formidable than the Ammonites were, a bigger force. They had iron swords and spears. And again, this is not going to sound like a big deal to us. Like, well, who cares? But this is kind of the equivalent today of saying, okay, we're going to go fight this force, and we have, let's just say we have swords or something, and they have like drones, or weaponized drones, or they have something that we just can't fight against. Maybe that's a little hyperbolic in the way I say that, but it's a technology thing. And they had this knowledge to be able to form these weapons that were advanced. The Israelite army had older weapons like bows or slings. And so they're afraid of the Philistines. They begin to desert Saul. They're hiding in caves, thickets, and crossing the Jordan to the land of Gad and Gilead. You have people who are afraid. And Saul himself doesn't have enough faith to inspire courage on the part of his followers. This is a point where, perhaps in a sense, he had not formed enough trust and faith in God. And in a sense, he was allowing his own smallness to take over. And in those scenarios, actually, someone's ego can really take over in a very negative way. You ever hear about a Napoleon complex? Like, that's kind of, I think, what's going on here. That he's got to make himself seem big, even though he's really not all that big. And if he trusted in God, he wouldn't have to worry about how big or how small he is. And I think that's the lesson that we find with David and Goliath in just a little bit. But when the time for sacrifice came and Samuel's not there, he offered a sacrifice. He thinks it's more important to just go ahead and get this done because I'm concerned about this. But Samuel rebukes Saul. He says his dynasty would not be in Israel. Your house is not going to continue. And the people are defeated. Thankfully, Jonathan's faith in God helped him defeat a Philistine outpost. Remember, he and his servant took out 20 Philistines just by themselves. And then he and Saul joined forces and chased them to Ajalon. And they go on to defeat the Moabites, the children of Ammon, Edom, the kings of Zobah, the Philistines, and the Amalekites. So again, Jonathan is a great bright point in this as well. But Saul's not trying to take their land as his, I think, at this point. I think he's rather trying to push them back out of Israel's territory. But his humility faded, and his favor with God faded. And God sent Saul to take vengeance on the Amalekites. As he had promised in Moses' day, the time had come for him to destroy the Amalekites. He's instructed to kill everything that's alive. And Saul is successful in battle, but he doesn't obey God. He spares the king and he spares the best of the animals. And he only obeyed God so long as his own desires fit God's laws. If it was convenient for him, then he would do it. If it worked out for him, then he would do it. And this cost him the kingdom. God sent word to Saul through Samuel. The kingdom was torn from him, that his son would never reign. Yes, ma'am.
Do you think if they did genetic testing now, do you think they could trace Netanyahu and that man from Syria that went into exile to those people back in those days? Because they were fighting all the time in those days, killing each other. And they're still fighting and killing each other.
I don't know about that because I don't. Because the only thing I would say about that, I don't know Netanyahu's family history.
That's what I'm saying.
But
tested.
Well, the British government basically allowed European Jews to populate that area back in like the 40s. And so most of the people that call themselves Jews in that area have no familial relation to the Jews of the Old Testament.
So they just came there and started calling themselves Jews.
Yeah. Now, I'm not saying they started calling themselves Jews. They were Jewish people. Like they're thinking racially and ethnically, that's who they are. But the people that are over there that call themselves Jews actually have nothing to do with the Jews of the Bible. They're just totally different people, ethnically and so on and so forth. In fact, I've understood that the Palestinians likely have more blood relation to the people of the first century Jews. I don't know if all that's true. I'm just saying that I think that's that part that I said about the Europeans basically engineering that. I think that's what happened. But yes, sir.
Heard said you have two in studies that this has been a family battle. It's been going on since Abraham.
Yes.
And it will never stop. I mean, people keep saying, well, they're going to have peace there. I don't think so. I don't think the way it is set up, I don't think there will ever be peace there, because the only way there can be peace is in Jesus Christ. And that family, parts of it, will never accept Jesus. Even the Jews don't accept it.
Right. And especially when we think about Zionism and the Zionists that are there, there's no interest. A lot of those, from what I understand, don't even really practice Judaism. It's more of an ethnic thing for them. But
I think one of the keys here, and I may have said this in class before, is when Ishmael was born, there was prophecy made of him. He will be a wild man. His hand will be against every man will be against his hand. They're the Arabs are the descendants of Ishmael. That's why they're fighting.
That could tie into it. I
have an expression I use to myself. I said, well, they'll be fighting until the Lord comes.
Yeah. Perhaps so. And it's something that it's difficult too, because there's so many. There are some ways that we can kind of get sort of understanding of it, but there's a lot of layers to that. And especially when we talk about how the modern way that area is today. But we're focusing on something actually very different. I think the situation is very different today than it was in the times that we're talking about. And really now everything's been revealed. God has fulfilled all of his promises. And whatever happens over there really has no bearing on God's plans. I mean, God, people call it the Holy Land. But the only way that it's holy is the sense that there was a time when God chose that land to bring his people to. And he fulfilled all of his promises. Nothing that goes on over there has anything to do with how we hold the scriptures and look at them today. Except just to say, as Brother Albie said, we can certainly pray that the people that are in these conflicts over there, that they come to Jesus, that they recognize who Jesus is someday. I'm not jumping to go evangelize over there, but I think that's really the only hope that they would have there. I hope that helps a little bit. All right, okay. So God sent word to Saul through Samuel that his son Jonathan would never reign on his throne. That's a tough message, and it's sad too because Jonathan is a good guy. You know, God could have chosen Jonathan, but that's not what he was going to do. He sends Samuel to Bethlehem to anoint a young man named David to be the next king. And so that all secretly happens. The Philistines come to battle once again. They're encamped between Soko and Azekah. And Saul's army encamps in the valley of Elah. We know what's coming, right? We remember this conflict. They both have strong positions. It's a stalemate. And the Philistines send one man to fight for their cause and challenge Israel to send a man to fight him. This man was 9.5 feet tall. He had a spear that was like a weaver's beam. And what that means is that this spear was not for throwing. If you have a spear that's big enough that, you know, if you try to throw that thing, what's it going to do? Just thunk. It's not for throwing. It's a spear for melee combat, for him to plunge into the ground and thrust against someone else. And the way that Goliath's armor is described makes you think about a Greek warrior. Makes you think about the movie they put out years ago, the 300, the Spartans. That's how his armor is described. And so that's the impressive aspect of this. And it goes back to the fame of the Spartans and things like that. Not that the Israelites necessarily knew about all that, but that they see this man who's just absolutely impressive. But David's faith in God gives him the courage to kill this giant. And he kills Goliath there in the valley of Elah. You can see there between Soko and Azekah in that region. David, after this time, is risen to prominence. He's taken into Saul's house. He no longer lives with his father Jesse. He plays the harp to soothe Saul, becomes friends with Jonathan. And actually, right now, it might be best for us to hold off on this. And is it okay if we pause here, Jeremy? Come back to this. I'm on slide, if it helps, I'm on slide 30. Any other comments or questions before we keep going? I didn't want to just run through everything else.
Well, maybe I'll just
Okay.
back off that something about it.
Brother Al?
Before we leave Jonathan, I think it's interesting that Jonathan didn't test this or contend against it. He had to be aware that he wasn't going to be chosen, even though he was the eldest son.
Yes.
But he obeyed God.
Yeah.
So,
And I think that passage is beautiful when Jonathan is telling David, you will reign. And he's essentially saying, and I'll be at your side. It's just like this really cool thought to me. Can you imagine Jonathan being next to David and kind of being sort of his advisor as he rules? Like, that would be so cool. I think about this like, I wonder if Jonathan had been around to help David. Maybe he could have said on that night, hey, you should really be at the battle. You shouldn't be here. And maybe David wouldn't have gone up on that rooftop and seen Bathsheba. I don't know about that. I'm not saying that's what would have happened, but having Jonathan as an advisor, just a really cool, like, alternate timeline kind of thing in my mind. Yes,
I
sir.
will say this, though. It talks about a friend that is closer than a brother, that kind of thing. Jonathan
Yes.
was like it with David.
Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely.
They loved each other. And that's something that men need to keep in mind. It's good for us to have brothers who care about us and we care about them, and where we have a close relationship with them. And that really is necessary for us to be the men that we need to be. Anything else?